When Jimmy Buffett passed away, his homes became the subject of endless article shrines for parrotheads, symbols of carefree island living. But one of them, a Key West property tucked away behind swaying palms and a weather-beaten white gate, slipped into silence. It wasn't one of his biggest estates, nor the most public, but it was the place where he'd sometimes retreat alone, away from stages and crowds. Locals said he loved the porch swing there, where the sound of the Gulf waters carried into the night like a lullaby. Months later, a couple from Miami, Thomas and Rachel, bought the house. They weren't parrotheads, not really. They admired Buffett's music in the way most Americans did, as background to summer barbecues and beach drives. But what drew them in wasn't the man. It was the house itself. Airy rooms with wooden shutters, a yard filled with tangled bougainvillea, and a view of the water that was as tranquil as it was haunting. From the start, however, things felt off. The first evening they spent there, Rachel noticed the faint smell of salt and rum drifting through the hallway, though neither of them had opened a bottle. At night, the ceiling fan in the master bedroom would creak rhythmically, as if keeping time to a melody they couldn't quite place. Once, half asleep, Thomas thought he heard strumming soft guitar chords, wandering, unfinished. He got up to check the living room, only to find the silence heavy, broken only by the hum of the old refrigerator. Neighbors had warned them the place carried his spirit, but they'd said it with a smile, like it was a blessing. The couple began to wonder if it was something more literal. Late one evening, Rachel sat on the porch swing, letting the humid air wrap around her. The swing moved gently, though she hadn't pushed off. In that slow motion, she swore she heard the faintest whisper lyrics, maybe, or laughter carried from nowhere. She stepped off quickly, heart pounding, and the swing stilled as if it had never moved at all. Over time, the atmosphere grew heavier. Keys left on the kitchen counter would vanish, only to reappear on the porch. Lamps flickered with no electrical cause. And always, that faint sound of strumming like someone rehearsing a song not meant to be finished. Thomas began recording the nights, convinced he'd catch the sound. He never got music on tape, only a low rush, like ocean waves far too close to be real. The couple started to disagree. Rachel wanted to leave, but Thomas was fascinated. He felt a strange pull toward the house, toward its music, as if he too wanted to hear the chorus that never came. And so they stayed, caught between the beauty of the property and the unsettling sense that Jimmy Buffett never truly left his retreat by the sea. The days in the Key West house were deceptively calm. Sunlight spilled in through the old shutters, painting golden slats across the wooden floorboards. Rachel filled the kitchen with flowers from the local market, hibiscus, orchids, frangipani, trying to make the place feel like theirs. For a while it worked. The house looked alive, but it never quite felt alive in the way a home should. There was always that undercurrent, that sense of someone else's presence lingering just beyond reach. Rachel noticed it most in the afternoons, when the heat pressed down and the whole neighborhood grew still. She'd sit by the window with a glass of iced tea, listening to cicadas, when suddenly the air would shift. The curtains would sway even though no wind stirred outside. Sometimes, from the back of the house, she would hear the shuffle of feet across the floorboards, measured, unhurried, almost like the rhythm of someone pacing while humming to themselves. But whenever she called out, the sound would stop, and the silence afterward felt heavier than before. Thomas, on the other hand, was drawn to the mystery. He started spending evenings on the porch, rocking slowly on the swing, almost inviting whatever presence there was to show itself. He claimed he could catch fragments of words, half-sung phrases that dissolved the moment he tried to listen closely. "It's like he's still here," Thomas whispered one night, staring into the shadows of the yard. "Like the house doesn't want to let him go." Rachel shivered at his words because she felt it too, though she would never admit it. At night, the strumming became more distinct. It was never the polished sound of a song, but rather the private kind of playing one does alone, lazy chords, a bit of trial and error, the plucking of strings searching for melody. There was no guitar in the house, yet the sound seemed to rise from the living room as naturally as the smell of salt air through the open windows. Thomas would lie awake, listening, caught between awe and unease, while Rachel buried her head under the pillow, silently counting the hours until dawn. The neighbors avoided speaking directly about the house, but there were glances, knowing nods, small hesitations in their voices. An older woman who lived across the street finally told Rachel in hushed tones that Buffett had spent his last quiet seasons here, often alone with his notebooks and instruments. "He loved this place more than people knew," she said, her eyes flicking toward the porch as though careful not to linger too long. "And sometimes, love keeps a soul nearby." Rachel stopped inviting people over after that. The house felt too exposed, too fragile, as if the wrong visitor might break whatever balance was keeping the presence at bay. She began to notice how the atmosphere seemed to shift with their moods. On calm days, the house carried a peaceful, almost reassuring hum, but on nights when she and Thomas argued, the lights flickered more violently, the air grew stifling, and doors would creak as though scolded into silence. One late evening, after a storm had rolled through, Rachel found herself standing barefoot in the kitchen, staring at the floorboards. Water dripped from the eaves outside, but inside there was another sound of faint tapping, steady and deliberate, like the beat of a drumstick against wood. She followed it into the hallway, her pulse racing, until she reached the door to the study. The tapping stopped the moment she touched the knob. She stood there, holding her breath, convinced that if she opened the door, she would find someone or something waiting. She didn't open it that night. Instead, she returned to bed and lay awake until the first pale light of morning crept in, wondering how much longer they could endure the strange coexistence of the living and the lingering. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The weeks slipped into months, and what had begun as small, almost dismissible occurrences grew into something neither Thomas nor Rachel could entirely ignore. The house, beautiful and inviting under the Florida sun, seemed to wear a second skin when night fell, a skin of shadows, of murmurs, of impressions that lived just beyond the edge of certainty. Rachel noticed how her routines shifted first. She stopped using the study altogether. The door remained closed, and she made excuses to herself about the dust, about not needing the space, about preferring to write her emails at the kitchen table. But deep down, she knew it wasn't dust or convenience, it was the way the study pressed against her nerves, the way it seemed charged, like a stage after the lights have gone out, but the performer has not yet left. Sometimes she would pass the door and hear, faintly, the sound of a pen scratching across paper. And once, just once, when she leaned too close, she caught a whiff of cigar smoke, faint and sweet, curling out from the keyhole like a memory escaping. Thomas, meanwhile, grew restless in a different way. He became enamored with the idea that the house wanted something, that perhaps Jimmy Buffett's spirit wasn't aimlessly drifting but trying to communicate. He would sit on the porch swing until long after midnight, eyes half closed, listening. He scribbled notes in a pad he carried everywhere, snippets of words he thought he heard, chord progressions hummed into the dark, impressions that came to him in dreams. At first, Rachel thought it was harmless, even charming, but then his focus hardened into obsession. He began neglecting work calls, forgetting meals, spending whole days chasing a melody that wasn't his to capture. The tension between them thickened, and the house seemed to mirror it. On evenings when their voices rose in argument, the shutters would slam against the windows though the air outside was still. The ceiling fan in the bedroom would speed up, spinning so fast the chains rattled like wind chimes in a storm. Once, when Rachel shouted in frustration, the porch swing snapped from its chain and crashed to the ground with a splintering crack, though no one had touched it. They stared at the wreckage in silence, hearts pounding, both unwilling to say aloud what they knew. It wasn't just the house aging, it was the house reacting. Sleep became the most fragile thing. Rachel often woke at 3 a.m., the sheets clinging to her skin in the thick humidity. The sound of guitar strings would float through the halls, sometimes gentle, sometimes sharp, like fingers striking too hard against metal. She would nudge Thomas awake, but by the time he sat up, the music would fade into nothing. He began to resent her for disturbing him, insisting that if she only listened with patience, she would hear what he heard. She stopped waking him after that and lay alone in her private terror, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds until dawn. One night, when the moon hung swollen and pale over the gulf, Rachel went into the yard barefoot, needing air. The grass was damp, and the salt wind lifted her hair. She looked back at the house, and for a moment it didn't feel like hers at all. The windows, lit faintly from within, seemed like eyes watching her. And there, in the living room window, she thought she saw a figure tall, relaxed, swaying slightly as if to unheard music. It wasn't Thomas, he was asleep in bed. She blinked, and the shape was gone. But she couldn't shake the sense that whoever it was had been smiling. Not with menace but with the easy grin of someone who had never truly left. The next morning, she found her keys on the porch swing, even though the swing had been broken for weeks. They were lined neatly, almost deliberately, as though placed there by a careful hand. Thomas insisted it was a sign, that they were being invited into some secret, but Rachel felt only dread. The house was no longer a retreat. It was a threshold, and the longer they stayed, the less certain she became of which side of it they belonged to. Rachel began to measure time in the house not by days, but by the changes in atmosphere that seemed to settle over its rooms. Mornings were still deceptively normal, the smell of coffee, the light flooding across the floorboards, gulls crying somewhere over the gulf. But as the hours stretched toward dusk, the air inside grew heavy, laden with a strange expectancy. By late evening, it was as if the house itself leaned closer, listening, waiting for something neither she nor Thomas could define. She tried to keep busy, filling her days with errands, anything that took her away from the property. Yet each time she returned, stepping through the weather-worn gate, she felt the subtle shift, the weight of the place pressing down. The silence of the porch broken only by the faint scrape of branches across the siding. She never said it aloud, but she began to dread unlocking the door, afraid of what would be different inside, even if the difference was so small it couldn't be explained. Thomas only sank deeper into the mystery. His pad of scribbled notes grew thicker, filled with half-finished lyrics and odd phrases he claimed weren't his. At night, he would sit in the study with the door closed, though Rachel had sworn never to go inside again. She would hear him murmuring, humming, sometimes strumming an invisible rhythm on the desk. When she asked what he was doing, he only smiled vaguely and said, "Listening." Once, when curiosity outweighed fear, Rachel pressed her ear to the study door. The sound she heard wasn't Thomas's voice, it was layered, as though someone else was humming with him, a harmony just beneath his pitch. Her throat went dry, and she pulled back quickly, telling herself it was her imagination. But the next morning, when she passed by, she noticed the faintest smear of ash along the doorframe, as if from a cigar stubbed out against the wood. The nights became worse. Rachel often woke to the smell of salt water, sharp and briny, as though the tide had risen straight into the house. Once, she found her sandals by the bed soaked through, wet sand pressed into the soles. She shook Thomas awake, but he only laughed softly and told her the house was playing with them. As if that should be reassuring. His calm unnerved her more than the phenomenon itself. He was becoming part of it, leaning into the presence like a guest eager to please a host. There were moments, too, when Rachel almost felt the presence trying to soothe her, warm air brushing her hair back when she sat alone, the sudden softening of a lamp's light when she cried. But then there were darker moments. The time every picture frame in the hallway tilted at the exact same angle overnight, or when the broken porch swing was somehow set upright again, swaying gently as though unseen hands had restored it. One evening, during a power outage after a storm, they lit candles throughout the house. The shadows bent strangely, long and wavering across the walls. As Rachel sat on the couch, staring at the flickering light, she heard the distinct clink of ice against glass, the unmistakable sound of a drink being poured. Thomas froze too, both of them listening. It came from the kitchen, steady, casual, like the start of a quiet evening ritual. Neither of them moved to investigate. When the sound stopped, the silence that followed was suffocating. Rachel started to dream differently. At first, they were harmless visions of the ocean, of endless blue horizons. But slowly, the dreams grew more specific. She dreamt of sitting at the porch with a man she could never quite see, his face hidden in the glow of sunset. She'd wake with the faint echo of laughter in her ears, as if someone had told her a joke she couldn't remember. The house was no longer simply haunted, it was pulling them into its rhythm, reshaping their lives around its hidden pulse. And though Rachel fought against it, she could feel Thomas slipping further away, as if the more time he spent within those walls, the less of him belonged to her at all. The final months in the Key West house blurred into a strange season of unease, where reality and suggestion folded into one another until neither Thomas nor Rachel could tell where the haunting ended and their own lives began. The beauty of the place, the turquoise shutters, the palms brushing against the windows, the endless horizon of the gulf was still there, but it had become a mask. Beneath it, something lived, something tethered to memory and music, refusing to fade. Rachel tried to hold on to ordinary habits. She cleaned, cooked, filled the house with fresh flowers, but it was like placing small lamps inside a cave. The darkness, though not malicious in the way of monsters or nightmares, was insistent, creeping back no matter how much she tried to dress the place in warmth. The smells of cigar smoke, salt water, and rum never left. They came and went with the hours like tides. And always, in the evenings, there was music unfinished, restless, notes that would never find their chorus. Thomas surrendered to it. What had started as curiosity had grown into a full devotion. He told Rachel he was writing with him, as though Jimmy Buffett himself were leaning over his shoulder in the study. His notebook filled with pages that were not quite his voice, not quite his hand. Sometimes Rachel would catch him speaking softly into the air, pausing as if listening, then nodding and writing again. His eyes grew distant, and she began to feel like she was living with a stranger. Their arguments no longer startled the house into reacting. Instead, the house seemed to absorb the tension, to lull Thomas back into calm, even as Rachel pulled further away. She began sleeping in the guest room, but even there the presence found her the flick of a light, the whisper of a melody threading through her dreams. One night, during another storm, the house reached its climax. Rain hammered the shutters, wind roared down the street, and inside the study, Thomas sat at the desk with a candle flickering beside him. Rachel stood in the hallway, watching him through the crack of the door. His hand moved furiously across the page, as if transcribing words dictated to him. But the thing that froze her blood wasn't his writing, it was the second shadow cast on the wall beside him. The candlelight threw Thomas's silhouette sharp and clear, but next to it, swaying gently, was another figure. Broad shoulders, a loose stance, head bowed as if strumming. The shadow's hand moved, not against paper, but against invisible strings. And Rachel heard it, 2 guitar chords, soft and meandering, filling the room though no instruments sat within it. She staggered back, clutching the wall, heart racing. For a moment, she thought to run, leave Thomas, leave the house, leave the island altogether. But when she glanced back once more, she saw his face. He was smiling, calm in a way she hadn't seen in years. And in that moment, she realized he would never leave. Not willingly. By morning, the storm had passed. The study door stood open, the notebook resting neatly on the desk. Thomas sat on the porch, sipping coffee, his eyes bright with something that unsettled her. "I finished it," he said simply, tapping the notebook. "We finished it." Rachel read the pages later, her hands trembling. The lyrics were warm, nostalgic, tinged with humor and longing, the kind of song that could have been his. But at the bottom of the final page, beneath Thomas's handwriting, was a faint scrawl she didn't recognize. It wasn't a signature, not quite. Just a line, "See you by the water." That was the breaking point. Rachel packed her bags within the week. She couldn't stay in a house where her husband shared his life with someone who was no longer living. She left Thomas there, with the notebook, the music, and the restless presence that had claimed him. Neighbors say he still lives there, still seen on the porch in the evenings, rocking gently as if listening to a private concert no one else can hear. Sometimes, when the wind carries just right, passers-by swear they hear it too, the soft strum of a guitar, the low hum of a voice that sounds achingly familiar, drifting out from behind the old shutters. The house, they say, never really let Jimmy Buffett go. And now, neither did Thomas. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.